Welcome to our first coffee and coaching session, which is very exciting. It's a little bit of an experiment in the school community for everybody. So Ray and I are going to be running some of these sessions where we dive into topics around running a practice or a firm. I'm Tim Smith, so some of you will have seen me or met me via the community, and most of you also know Ray Brown, who's the founder and CEO of Akibiz. So today we're going to talk around a few things and try and give some real nuggets, I guess, across how we see the practice and the four key components of running the firm. We've just got a couple of visitors who have joined us this morning. Simon, who recently completed the Fast Track MBA, and Paul, who's also working with us at Akibiz. So I'm going to hand over to Ray straight away. He's got a special little slide he wants to share to kick things off. And then we'll jump into some of these, hopefully, practical tools that you can apply in your business.
All right. So there is a narrative in architecture that it's hard to make money and hard to make profit, and it's a difficult business. And Tim and I hear that over and over again. And part of the purpose of the community and part of the purpose of these sessions is to just give you the real world experience that we're getting in terms of making architectural practices profitable. And we've got a range of practices, and I think we can say that every single practice is profitable, and most of them profitable in the 15 to 25% net profit range. And that's after the owner of the practice gets a proper market rate salary for the work that they're doing. So we've often had conversations about how do we actually do that? How do we get this outcome? And it's quite hard sometimes to put your finger on exactly what has caused that change and transformation. In this diagram, we call it a bit of magic, and it really just shows the leverage effect of improving efficiency and other aspects of the business to give you a better outcome. So very quickly, if you've got revenue of $500,000, could be any number that you wish. You've got expenses, and typically in an architectural practice, the expenses are pretty fixed. So that's your salaries, your rent, your insurance. And if you get that number right, you know, well, every month I need to find X amount to pay the bills, and everything that comes above that will be a profit. So in terms of business, an architectural practice is, it's a very simple business model. You buy hours from people, convert them into invoices, and what's left over is a profit. So in this business, 100%, the expenses are 90%, and we make 10% profit. So we say to people, well, what would we like to improve that profitability by 50%? Okay, and that sounds huge. So the profit goes from 10% to 15%. That's a 50% improvement. So instead of making $50,000, we're making $75,000 from our 500K revenue. And that is a 50% improvement. Very simple mathematics. The magic comes when we start looking at what do we need to do to achieve that 50% improvement in profitability. And when you look at that, if we keep the expenses the same, which we should be able to do on an established business, we know what the costs are, then we need to go from 500 to 525 to account for the 25%, 25,000 improvement in profit. And that's a 5% change. Okay, it's not 50%, it's not 30% or 20%, it's a 5% change on the top line. And that top line can be come in two ways. It can be improved pricing or improved efficiency. Okay, so when you're looking at your business, don't look at this creation of profitability as a huge target that you're highly unlikely to get. It's really there to be done, and think of it as small incremental changes. If anybody's read the Atomic Habits book, the author there speaks about the aggregation of incremental change. That's what it's all about. So then the question becomes, where do we look for these savings within the business? And quite often the conversation is about more work. If we could just get more work and we had better marketing, then all our problems would be solved. And really, at Archibus, we take a much broader view of the architectural business and the practice. And we reckon that there are 4 areas that we can work in. We call them the 4 Ps. 4 areas that you can look at, and we'll cover something in each of these today in this quick session. But and we cover them in a lot more depth in the Fast Track MBA with a new cohort starting in November. That's the sales pitch. But the 4 Ps start off with the practice itself. And these are in order, okay? So you can work on all 4 of the Ps, but you really want to work them in order, because that will make the biggest difference to how your practice looks and feels. So the practice is about making profit, running efficiently. So does this entity work as a whole? So we start off with the practice, then we've got the project. So if the practice is making money, perhaps there's some more efficiency that we can get out of the projects, how we run them, how we plan them, how we allocate tasks on projects. So we'll get the practice right, and then we can start iterating around improvement of the project processes within the practice. And we'll speak about a few of those today. Then we've got people. So you can have a successful practice, you can run your projects well, but you can still have people who are not as efficient as they could be within the practice. And there's an opportunity. How do we get everybody in the practice to be equally efficient in generating the right amount of revenue and profit for the business? And in the middle, we've got our last P, call this perception. So this is the perception of the practice, internally and externally. What does it look like? Who does it appeal to? Is it, we use the car industry analogy a lot. Are you a Rolls-Royce business or a Suzuki business? Both are fine, but you need to decide which is which, and you need to control that perception, not leave it to chance. And it'll be reflected in your communication and your website, and even how you answer the phone and what your office looks like. So there are the 4 Ps: practice, projects, perception, and people. And today we're going to look at just some examples in each of those so that we can at least get you thinking about how we improve the efficiency or the profitability of your practice. So we've got, welcome Kirsty, Kirsty Newell. I don't know, where are you speaking from, or where are you sitting? Hello? Oh, Kirsty doesn't want to speak. That's all right. No problem.
Sorry. I'm from the Sunshine Coast in Queensland.
All right. Welcome. And there will be a recording, so the little bit you missed at the beginning, you'll be able to pick up subsequently. So, Tim, let's start with practice. What are the things that you would get people to look at that will make the biggest impact in the practice, or at least an impact on the practice performance?
So the first thing, I guess, at the top of my mind around the practice is the board meetings. And I feel like at Archibus, we talk about these quite a lot. And we have this idea of board thinking. So it's less about a formal board with, lots of high back chairs and oak paneled rooms. It's much more about the principle of getting together once a month to work on the business. And lots of people, and I've seen it on LinkedIn recently, actually, a bit of a debate around working on your business and working in your business. But we really encourage architects to work on their business as well and not just get stuck in the work. And the board getting together for that set time period each month, either with other senior people within your practice or someone externally to help you, support you, and run that session, is time to do that. It's time to sort of step back, look at the key reports, figure out where things are going, look across finance, sales, marketing, and operations, and just have that really clear, holistic view of the business. So things, aren't surprises, I guess. You can deal with the challenges that are coming up. You can plan in advance. You can take a look in the rearview mirror and see what has happened, but more importantly, you can keep looking forward. So we have a suite of reports that we encourage people to use around the board and the board thinking, and that monthly rhythm is really important. So getting together every month at the same time, on the same day, and having that constant rhythm in your practice makes a huge difference. The other part to that, really, in terms of that consistency, when you have goals for the year or a budget or a vision, breaking it down into monthly chunks in order to achieve those visions makes things, it's quite fascinating, really. Well, it's quite amazing how close people get to their budgets or their financial sort of goals for the year, especially when you're working at it iteratively and you're hitting your goals every month. Then lo and behold, you make it at the end of the year, and it's quite a beautiful thing. So that's the quick sort of 2 minutes on the board. It's really about board thinking. It's about getting together and sort of making the time and spending the time working on the business. And there's a key KPI as well. I'm going to hand back to Ray. That is also covered in the board around the. One of them is around the WIP. Ray, tell us about that.
Yeah, all right. I just couldn't agree more with you about the board. And the question really is, what's the alternative? If you don't have a board once a month for an hour or an hour and a half, when do you speak about strategy? When do you speak about the projects that are improving the practice? They tend to be corridor conversations or over a beer at night, and becomes very spread. And more often than not, it just doesn't happen. So I can't back up Tim more than that around the importance of the board and board thinking. And Tim mentioned the work in progress. So work in progress in different organisations has different meanings. So in our way we work, it's got a very specific meaning. So work in progress for us is taking a list of all the projects that you've got and the uninvoiced portion of those projects. If you haven't started a project, it would be the full fee. If you've done half the project, it would be obviously 50% of that fee. You add that up, and that's it. At the end of the month, that's how much signed up work we have. And if you record that number on a monthly basis, it's one of a suite of 6 or 7 key financial KPIs that we use. And if you record that over time, you begin to pick up a picture of, is the work in progress dropping, getting better, or is it staying the same? And how does it look compared to this time last year? So it gives you a lot of information. And KPIs, key performance indicators, are really about the trends within the business. So what if someone else was running your business, what 6 or 7 numbers would you like to see on a weekly or a monthly basis to give you reassurance that the business is in good hands and traveling well? And I think one of the top of my list would be, is the work in progress growing, and is it, or at least staying stable, which effectively means that you're picking up enough work to cover the work that you've done each month. So you'll invoice some and your work in progress comes down, and then you'll pick up some new work, and that will re-establish the work in progress number. And it's just one of those key numbers that takes some of the feeling out of business. Can be very feelings based. You'll have a good day or a bad day. So you really need to get these objective numbers that say, well, it's not really that bad, because here we are. You may have lost a contract or a project's gone on hold, but over the piece, when we look at the practice as a whole, things aren't too bad, and we've got numbers to back that up, not just feelings. All right.
I just the one point of that is, I think that trend and the metric gives you, and that ability to look into the future. There aren't that many numbers or KPIs in the practice that enable to give us, or that give us that foresight. And if you can see your WIP building, and you've got 6 months or 8 or 10 months worth of work in that WIP, and you can see it incrementally growing, then that gives you the confidence to go out and hire staff and make plans for the future, as opposed to what we say is not a strategy for hiring. Get busy, get help. The WIP actually gives you a view, in terms of what is likely to happen in 6 months' time, and it's the same if that WIP is declining. So it's a fantastic number to know and to keep a close eye on.
All right, projects, Tim. One of your you've done a lot of work in how practices manage their projects and plan out.
Yeah, the thing I think that is interesting in projects, and I know you're going to talk about margins, which is sort of more how to manage the projects and make them profitable. The project mix, so what types of projects you bring into your practice and you have, also can make a huge impact on the practice and the profitability of the practice. Even if you're even if you're focusing on residential architecture, there's still value in having a range of projects. We talk about this idea of a honeycomb. and having a couple of larger projects, a handful of projects sort of in the middle, like mid-sized projects, and a couple of small ones, to us make sense. And having that broad mix, it sort of de-risks the practice to a certain extent. You can't have, people will have experienced this, you can't have 50 low value projects and you'll be running around like a headless chicken, and you won't be making any money. And equally, you can't necessarily just have large projects. If you have 3 or 4 large projects, and a lot of people think that large projects in a firm are the answer, and they can be great and they can be profitable, but when they do take a lot of work, and when large projects stop or go on hold, which we know from experience inevitably happens, they do create large holes. And then when everything's been going along nicely and the team's been full and the capacity of the studio has been great, one of those large projects drops off, and then obviously there's the new business hustle to fill them in. So thinking about and actually targeting the types of projects you want to bring into the studio, and thinking about what that honeycomb and that mix of projects might look like is really important. And the only thing I'd add to that is if you can also have some commercial work or some government work or some organizational work, and split your risk a little bit and your work across more than one sector, it does obviously help in terms of diversification and stability. The different types of projects in different sectors have different paces and different needs, and obviously there's less risk as well. So not everybody can do it, but it's something that we encourage if it's within your skill set and the type of work you want to do.
Yep, I think the concept of the honeycomb is really important, and it's something that we need to understand. What's the best mix of projects for your practice, your resources? Every practice is different. That's something that we've found. There's no one size fits all, but you do need the fundamental frameworks and reports that can give you that stability that you need. One of the things we've been speaking about for a long time over the last few years has been margins. And in architecture, there's been a real adherence to charge out rates. Charge out rate is the big financial model that's used within architecture. And we're not saying that you do away with charge out rates, and trying to make sure that every hour covers a portion of profit and a portion of overhead coverage. You can do that and then use multiples and all those things, which is potentially valuable for you. But I think there is another lens that we should be looking through as well. And if you think in a retail situation, a clothes shop, somebody buys a t-shirt for $3 and sells it for $20, they know that t-shirt is going to contribute $17 to pay the rent and the salaries and whatever. And in our mind, there's no reason for architecture to be completely different from that, because the thing that you buy is the hours of people, and the fee is fixed. So the difference between the actual cost of the hours and the fee is the same as the t-shirt margin. That's the money that's going to go to pay the overheads and the costs of the business. So if you're not making somewhere between 2.5 to 3 times people's salary per hour that they're actually billable, then you're probably going to struggle. And the key that we've found is that different projects will have different levels of margins for different reasons. Okay, if you're doing a favour for a friend, you're going to probably make less margin than you are for a person who's building a huge house with unlimited budget or significant budget, less focus on cost. They just want a really good outcome. So the margins can be different, and it's good to know that. If you try and average across every project by using exclusively charge out rates, then you're not going to get that visibility around the projects. And our second P being projects, you want as much visibility from as many different directions as you can. So for us, calculating margins at the beginning of the project, so you calculate a fee. You've obviously calculated the hours as part of the coming up with that fee. Before the project starts, you actually know what the theoretical margin or contribution is from that project. And that's what you should be managing, and making sure that at the end of the day, that margin's actually been delivered. Most practices that we meet have got no idea what the margins are. Everybody's been busy working on projects, got a really good outcome, we've taken some fantastic photographs, but was the margin created that we said would be there when we did set the fee in the first place? And that again comes back to the magic of creating profit. The more visibility you've got about where the money is going, where it's coming from, the more likely you are to make profit at the end of the day. Tim, anything to add on profit?
I think it's complicated, but it's also simple, you know. And I think that where you started, the t-shirt analogy is actually just a really good one, you know. Like, it costs this much, and you sell it for this much, and the gap in the middle, the margin, is the important bit that you need to, you know, and you need to protect. And all businesses operate like that, you know, really. And not all projects are the same. You know, I'm sure builders make lots of money on some projects and no money on others. And it's important to look at projects, you know, in isolation, really. And you will do projects that you know you're not going to make any money on, but there'll be a strategic reason for that, and that's fine. But there'll be other projects you do and you're going to know you're going to make a lot of money on, and that's also great. But you actually need to know that and have visibility across those different projects and which ones are profitable and which ones are not, because it's, yeah, if you can't treat them all the same, they don't turn out that way.
And I think the sequence of the 4 Ps is important here, because the practice can be profitable, doing well, but within that is hidden some projects that are making lots of margin and some projects that are not. And so you can be blinded almost by the success of the practice, and missing the opportunity to say, oh, if we tighten up here and get that best practice shared across the business, we could be making a lot more margin on all our projects, not just some.
Yeah, and that's where gut feel needs, you know, a bit of data to support that up makes a big difference. You can't just run the practice on gut feel alone. Okay, so we need to keep rolling along. This was projects, margins, and project mix. People is the third P. Shall I talk about recruitment, or do you want to talk about?
Yes, no, for sure. On you go. No, you do recruitment.
So we get a lot of questions about when to hire and who to hire and when is the right time to hire, which are all great questions. The bit I wanted to just touch on today is around this idea of the first employee and when to hire and who that should be. And I think traditionally in architecture, the practice owner starts their firm and then they go to make their first hire and they hire a full-time graduate architect. And I think that probably was fine, you know, for the times. But I guess these days it doesn't have to be like that. There's no rules around what that first employee should look like. And I think thinking a little bit more laterally around what the practice really needs. So is it someone who's more specialized in documentation, or is it someone who's more creative? And what's the type of person you actually need to bring into the practice as that first employee? They don't have to be full-time. And they also don't have to be sort of junior. You could get a really experienced architect for 2 or 3 days a week as your first employee, and that would be perfectly acceptable and could be a really good choice for your business. Paying a little bit more, and we see this in practices all the time. You know, roughly, let's say if you had to pay someone $10,000 more for a graduate architect to a registered architect, they could have, or even they may still both be graduates, but they could have 2 or even 3 years more experience. And while you're paying a higher salary, but it's not a massive difference. It might only be less than $1,000 a month. You'll get a huge, well, typically you will get a much more productive and capable employee that you don't have to manage as much, doesn't require as much of your time, and will be more productive. So it's not always, doesn't always make sense to save money on the salary. I think if you try and get the right person for the role, pay a good salary, get an experienced person who can really contribute to the practice, that can be it seems obvious as I say it, but quite a different way at looking at employing and what that first employee could look like.
Yep, good point, Tim. I think that first employee, and I think any employee, when you're taking someone, I think you've got to look at the broader needs of the practice and not be too constrained about, you know, the obvious next appointment is this type of person or that type of person. You've got to go a bit deeper than that.
Mm.
The other concept that we speak about a lot in the Fast Track MBA is the idea of capacity. So it doesn't matter how many people you've got in the practice, even if you're just on your own, you will have a capacity. And what we mean by capacity is how much can you, in an ideal world, bill at the end of the month if you've got a really good month. And the way to calculate this, we can show you how to do it. We've got a capacity calculator, but effectively you list the people, you list the number of hours they've got per week, you allocate a utilization. So a leader in the business might only be 50% billable, where a graduate might be 85 or 90% billable. Then you've got a notional charge out rate for each. And that really is just what's the market rate that you would expect to recover for each hour that you sell of that particular type of person. So you take your hours times the utilization times the charge out rate, gives you a number, can be per week or per month. You total that up for the business, and that's your capacity. That's what you theoretically should be able to bill on a week or a monthly basis. And you've already taken into account a utilization percentage. So this is not absolute pie in the sky. This is if everything goes right and you've got the right clients and the right processes, this is what you should be able to bill. And I can tell you there will always be a big gap between that number and your average billing per week or per month. Okay. And there's only one reason for that gap, and that is inefficiency of some kind. Inefficiency of marketing, inefficiency of project management, inefficiency of reporting. Those things will lead to just small losses in terms of efficiency in the business and create that gap between your potential billing and what you're actually billing on average. And it's not, shouldn't be seen as a criticism, it should be seen as a prize. We speak about it with our clients as this is the prize. This is where the 5% improvement comes to give you the 50% uplift in profit. You chip away at that inefficiency gap, and lo and behold, a year later, 2 years later, you find that the business can be really significantly profitable, and nothing that major seems to have changed in the business. There's just numerous tweaks along the way. That's capacity.
It's a great number to know. And I mean, I often get asked, how much should I be invoicing, or how much should we be making, and often practice leaders don't actually know what their capacity is, or what's actually, what's capable. And I think it's a simple formula, and it does give you a number, and like you said, it's a sort of a perfect scenario, but it enables firm leaders to sort of raise their gaze and go, oh, this is possible with this team and the right conditions and the right projects. I should be able to hit numbers like that. So I think in terms of, being aspirational or motivational, like you said, gaining that prize, it's got a really important role to play.
Great. Fourth P,
position. Why don't you start on positioning, and then
okay.
My bit sort of hangs off your bit. We're on 9:30, so we're going to run a few minutes over, but I think it's worthwhile wrapping up the 4 Ps rather than leaving 1 P hanging. What do you think?
You don't want to leave a P hanging, that's for sure.
No. I've still got some coffee left as well, so I'll finish my coffee and we'll finish the 4th P.
Okay, so positioning, really important. Where do you as a business fit in the market? Okay, and I did mention the car analogy earlier on in the introduction, and we see that as the best analogy for positioning. So if you take Suzuki, Ford, and Rolls-Royce, they all are very good brands that fit really well in the market. And how do we know they fit well in the market? Well, we know that there are not many Suzuki buyers going into Rolls-Royce showroom and vice versa. They know who their client is. They know what they do well and what they don't do quite so well, and they attract the appropriate type of client. And that's what we've got to look at for your practice. If you're getting used to, I don't seem to hear as much of it now, but when we started Archibus, there was a lot of conversations about tire kickers, people showing up and just testing out and asking a lot of questions, but they were never a fit for the business or the practice. And it's really important you know where you fit in, so that your messaging and your website and your language fits that positioning that you've got. If you're a Suzuki business, that's okay, but you've got to speak to Suzuki buyers in Suzuki language and provide a Suzuki type service. Okay, and that will be reflected in the price. It'll be reflected in the level of service you give. So the key is that you need to be able to very quickly pre-qualify people. And that in the initial conversation, are these people a fit for my practice? And the danger is if you're short of work, you take everybody, anybody with a pulse will fit in a new, and that's okay if you're a new business, but as your practice develops, if you want to be efficient and utilize your capacity properly, you want to have that ideal clients predominating in your client list and the projects that you're working on. So that's really positioning. Who are you? Where do you fit in? And again, in the MBA program, we speak about price, market, service, and just wait. All of those things need to be thought about when you are developing that differentiating factor that sets you apart from other practices. You want a client to come in and say, I feel at home here. These people are exactly what I need. These people are my tribe and I would like to work with them. So that's the feeling you need to get. Tim?
That's a great segue. That's exactly where I was going to start with this idea of differentiating. And I think it's something that a lot of architectural leaders or just people generally in the industry find quite difficult. Because they, especially if you're in residential architecture and it feels a bit like everybody's doing the same thing. We're all residential architects. How can we differentiate? How can we appear to be different when we're doing work in the same sector or the same category? So this, I think people then think, oh, I need to do. You can do a type of, it can be around design style, or it could be around location. We only do city houses, or we do houses in the country or on the coast or wherever it might be. But I think there's a sort of a nuance to it really in terms of, and I heard it recently, where you sort of focus on values and differentiate around values. And it's to Ray's point around the people arriving on your website or into your office and knowing you're in the right place, that you're their people. And so when you're communicating with, you want your ideal client to come to your website or inquire or walk into your office, and you want them to, you want to be communicating what matters to you. And it could be around sustainability. It could be around collaboration, or the things that are important that are sort of values-based things that you're sharing, and your ideal client or your people or your tribe are going to connect with. It could be around family, or this idea of intergenerational living, or whatever the things are that are really important to you as a practice. So it doesn't have to be a sort of a style of work or a design. It can be more personal, more personable, in order to attract the people who are aligned with you. We can also, values is one idea. There's also this notion of process and how you do things, the type of people and the skills and the resources you have in your team. So there's lots of layers to the practice that can enable you to differentiate in a subtle way in order to connect with your ideal client, which I think should be how architects think about it, rather than trying to appear sort of completely different.
I think that's spot on, and I think it's the biggest complaint I've got about architectural websites is they tend to let the buildings or let the pictures tell the story, and that very much limits the appeal that you're going to have to your market if you just focus on the buildings that you, or the constructions and designs that you favor. Remember that you are not the client, okay, and you are also not trying to impress other architects. You're trying to impress the people who are your ideal client. And as Tim says, that's about values, it's about friendliness, it's about process. Be different things for different people, and different people will put different weightings on these aspects of the relationship between them, their project, and you as a practice. So lots of opportunities in there to differentiate. So you're not, just don't let the pictures of your past work be your only message to the market.
It's very difficult to differentiate around design and rely on that. I think you're absolutely right. We don't